Hello chess fans, in today's video we're going to have a look at a fantastic game played between two giants of our sport. Nepomniachtchi with the white pieces against world's number one, Magnus Carlsen. And what a game it is. It's played in the quarterfinals of the Julius Baer Generations Cup. It's one of these online tournaments, part of the Champions chess tour. And a lot of bizarre things are happening in this game. That's why I would like to show it to you. It's important to realize that the game we're going to look at is an Armageddon, which means that the first four games of this match has ended in a draw, and now Nepomniachtchi is playing with the white pieces and he needs to play for a win. If the game is a draw, Magnus moves on to the next round. On the other side, Magnus is playing with less time. Nepomniachtchi has 10 minutes, Magnus 7.5. Let's have a look what happens in this game. I'm pretty sure you will enjoy it like most of my other videos, and I would like to make use of the opportunity to thank you all for the great support in the last couple of weeks, months and year. Let's help the channel to grow even further. Here we go. Nepomniachtchi goes for the move 1c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6. Well-known position from the Four Knights English opening. Many different ways of playing. Nepo goes for the move e3 and black goes for the move d5. Pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, and here the bishop comes out to b5 to put pressure on the knight. There are always ideas with knight takes e5, but here black first captures on c3. White takes back towards the center, of course, and here black develops the bishop to d6. So now, usually you would think that white is very comfortable having an extra pawn in the center. So the pawn goes to d4. This looks pretty nice pawn block. At this moment though, the bishop on c1 is not fully active yet. So black needs to come up with a good plan to deal with white's potential in the center. Queen f6 is played, and well, everything is still pretty much under control. Pawn on e5 is well protected. And the move played by Nepo here is d4, d5. He is just attacking that knight on c6. I've mentioned already, that knight is pinned, cannot move. That's not allowed, it's against the rules. The only move here for black to avoid the loss of material is the move a6, attacking the bishop. So if the bishop goes back to a4, you can always go b5 and the game goes on. So that's the way to unpin. And interestingly, this exact position was once reached before in another game by Magnus Carlsen. His opponent 2 years ago, Jan-Christoph Duda, played here bishop back to d3. Nepo decides to go back with the bishop to e2. So the knight got a move now. And look at this instructive maneuver as the knight goes back to b8. And that's not a loss of time, as after castling kingside, the knight comes to d7. And the knight feels really nice on this square, as very soon it will come to c5. And from c5, it can never be chased away again by any of white's pawns. Different ways of playing here. At some point, white got to do something with these pawns. Maybe it can go e4. In the game, the move c4 was played. And this is basically asking for some sort of tactical intermezzo, which Magnus refrained from doing. I mean, here, this move e4 can be played with a discovered attack on the rook and the knight. However, then the knight comes in to d4. It's a very double-edged position. I do really like black's prospects here. The knight can come to e5. Very soon the bishop can be released. So I think that pawn on e4 does look nice. But Magnus, keeping in mind that a draw is fine for him to move on to the semis, he just plays very solid chess. He castles, bishop e2. The knight now goes into a different direction. It's also very well placed on c5. Knight e2. Where's this knight going? Well, at some point, there are these ideas maybe to go knight b3. There are sometimes even ideas to go f4 to launch this bishop on that diagonal. Anyway, black realizes that the queen better steps to the side, one square. And with queen g6, you're looking at the pawn on g2. Bishop h3 is a serious threat to reckon with mating ideas on g2. White goes king h1. And here black finally completes his development with the move bishop f5. The last piece has been brought into play. The rooks are connected. The opening is over, and I think we can call it quite a success for black. It's still a game, but I do like these kind of positions that you control the center. I mean, white is occupying the center with an extra pawn, but these pawns have been brought to halt. The knight sits on a beautiful square. Rooks are connected. It's very difficult to crack black's position. White played the move rook c1. I guess that, well, with his bishop on f5, there were ideas perhaps to go bishop c2. That's why the rook goes there. Black consolidates with the move b6. And here the move f3. So are we seeing here a plan based on the move e4 to kick the bishop away? Well, interesting plan could be anyway to advance the pawn to e4 to prevent white from advancing the e pawn. I think it's a very ambitious move. Magnus once again goes for the more solid option, dropping back with the bishop to d7. And here the pawn goes to e4. So white now fully occupies the center with his extra pawn. And what is going to happen in the next couple of moves? There are no open files, only one pair of pawns have been exchanged. And well, I think that with moves like rook a e8, you can centralize the rook and anticipate a potential opening of the center with a pawn break like f4 or f5. But Magnus decides differently. He goes for the move f5 here right away. Super ambitious move. So he wants to initiate the exchange of pawns. And then later this bishop from d6 can become a really good piece, as the pawn on e5 will no longer be blocked, can be pushed to e4. But I guess that next move by Nepo was underestimated, as here white goes for the move f4. That's a very nice reply. I mean, full tension in the center, a lot of captures possible, but definitely black should not take here on f4. It runs into the move e5, attacking the bishop. Bishop on b2 is fantastic. These pawns are coming forward. Very soon the pawn on f4 will be regained. Tremendous play here for white. So that is one of the problems. I think you can take on e4. With a similar scenario, white gets this pawn on e5. But on the other hand, black also has a pawn on e4. So this is still razor sharp. Anything can happen. But here Magnus just played a sort of automatic move, as he brought in his remaining piece, rook a e8. But missing this. Look at this move, bishop h5. It's an attack on the queen, and you're dropping the exchange. That's a huge, huge blunder, and something Magnus should not do at all. I mean, I don't know what happened. He played pretty fast. He had still plenty of time on the clock, but he just overlooked that bishop. Now the pawn is no longer on f3. It can move to h5. The queen got a move. White captures on e8. Rook takes e8, and you are full exchange down. Do you have compensation? Well, the game will show us. Look at this. Pawn takes e5 was played. And now obviously if you do take with the bishop, bishops are coming off the board. You take on f5. I mean, it's a full exchange. Very soon the knight comes to f3. You move the queen. You will try to swap also another pair of rooks. And in the end, white does have an extra rook. It should be technically winning. But Magnus is here showing true fighter's spirit, as he sacrifices another exchange. Instead of capturing back with the bishop, he uses the rook for that occasion. And that's very, very interesting, as the rook, of course, it got to be taken. This diagonal for the bishop is open. The bishop is looking at that pawn on h2. Now after bishop takes e5, black recaptures. White is up, two full exchanges, but there is this mating threat on h2. If you go g3, there's bishop takes g3, so better don't do that. Knight f3 was played to cover the pawn on h2 and attack the bishop on e5. It looks as if it's completely hopeless. But the bishop comes in to f4, and that hits another rook on c1. And, well, there are still other ideas as well. As for instance, if you do move the rook away, black can always here think about taking with the pawn on e4. And if you take with the pawn on e4, the knight on f3 is under threat. And that knight is a very important defender of the pawn on h2. So, despite being two exchanges up, white has to be incredibly careful not to allow any sort of tactics. I mean, there are quite a number of interesting moves. The move played by Nepo is perhaps not the best, but very human one. He plays the move e5 to take away that threat of pawn takes e4. You have two fantastic pawns in the center. Now, after bishop takes c1, queen takes c1, okay, the damage has been under control. Like you're only an exchange down, but the attack is basically over. Look at this. Knight comes into e4. Black is not interested in the material, but brings in another piece into the attack. There's still this possibility to take on c1 anytime. But all of a sudden, there are other threats in this position as well, as the knight is looking for a check on g3, exploiting that pawn on h2 being pinned. Now, if white is very careful, he solves the problem here with rook c2. So the rook is no longer hanging. Now, if you allow this move knight g3, check, the pawn cannot take. There's king g1. You can give a check on e3 as well. There is rook f2. So you gotta place your rook to cover the check. Knight e4 back. So here, all of a sudden, there is this plan to regain both exchanges. But after king f1, knight takes f2, rook takes f2. If you do take one more time, the king takes back. And at the end of the day, white has managed to neutralize all the threats. Knight on f3 is a great defender of the king. And these pawns, they are really strong. The pawns can come forward. This should be technically winning. But it's a game with a shorter time control and miracles can happen. Instead of rook c2, they're followed queen to e1. And here, knight g3 check played. The king has only one square. You're not allowed to take it. King g1. And look at this. Knight takes f1. That is a great move, because if you simply capture the knight with either the queen or the king, then at the end there is bishop takes c1, and all of a sudden it is black who is up one piece, one bishop here. So that is not good, and white got to find an alternative plan. Played here this move, e6, that's a tricky one, because black should not be tempted here to take on c1. If you do that, there's pawn takes d7, there's a mating threat, there's a threat to queen, so that is all of a sudden winning for white. But keep it simple, just solve that problem, move the bishop away, back to e8, it's a good defender. That pawn cannot cause any harm here. White is in trouble because the rook on c1 is still hanging. Therefore, rook c3 played. Where's the knight going? Well, it simply captures on h2. And now you see that black has two bishops against the rook. And for instance, if you take on h2, you can take with the queen. And the simplest line, the most convincing line, is that if king goes here, you can try to play for an attack. But I think it also does make a lot of sense just to initiate the exchange of queens, control white's pawns. They cannot come any further. They are nicely blockaded. And very soon you bring up the king. And your kingside majority, you can bring all these pawns. The bishops will support them, the king as well. That is a very easy technical win for black. However, instead of taking on h2, they followed rook a3. White gotta do something. It's attacking the pawn on a6, but it's not really doing anything. The bishop dropped back to d6 to hit the rook. The rook got to move again. And then there is bishop c5. And now the king can't go really anywhere. If you go to h1, for instance, there is knight takes f3 with discovered check and mate. So that's game over. After bishop c5, you gotta interfere with the queen. Losing the queen means even that you're losing more material. Here, after bishop c5, Nepo resigned. And that resignation really hurts. I mean, he had a very good chance to move on to the semi-finals, being an exchange up. But it's fascinating to see how Magnus Carlsen turns a huge blunder into some sort of a genius concept. Instead of losing the exchange, he sacrifices a second one, and all of a sudden black's minor pieces came alive and were decisive in this mating procedure. Well, let me know in the comments, what do you think of this game? And I will see you soon again.